Former Trump campaign chairman Corey Lewandowski is weighing a Senate run in New Hampshire. In response, the New Hampshire Democratic Party released this campaign ad preemptively critical of a potential Lewandowski run.
Lewandowski was quick to respond on Twitter, calling the attack proof that Senator Jeanne Shaheen's record is weak. He goes on to call her a failed U.S. senator who has gotten rich serving as an elected official. Corey Lewandowski joins us now on this and to discuss his potential bid for Congress. Corey, I understand you've updated your Twitter bio as potential United States Senate candidate. Can you make the announcement official here on the show that you will be running for the United States Senate?
Well, I'm not ready to make the official announcement, but look, let me just lay out the time frame. The state of New Hampshire is probably the last state, it is the last state in the country to hold its primaries for non-presidential races. So the primary for this race is actually September of next year, so it's 1 year away.
Right.
The filing deadline is June of next year. And so look, as I've assessed the field, a new individual got in the race yesterday. The two other candidates in the race have now been in the race for 3 or 4 months, and we're going to see their financial statements, how much money they've been able to raise at the end of September, which is the end of the third quarter fundraising. If they haven't had the ability to raise significant resources to take on a two-term incumbent Democrat, then it's going to further motivate me to say, I think I can get in this race. I know I can win the Republican primary, and I can beat Jeanne Shaheen based on my record of being able to raise money, a national profile, and taking a fight directly to her.
Well, and the president seems to back you in this race.
Look, I don't speak for the president, but I speak with the president.
Yeah.
And
what's he saying?
I think the president was in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago. My entire family had the privilege to go up on Air Force One and spend some time with him. He encouraged us to really look at this race, understanding, because he's been through it, what the trials and tribulations are of a campaign and what that impact is on his family and his children and what it would be on my family and my children. But he also said it's so important to have the right voice in Washington, D.C., fighting for the right values. And so, you know, with the encouragement from the president, I've had a lot of family discussions about him. We're very, very close.
So now he wasn't able to win New Hampshire. So what makes you think you'd do better than he would?
Well, when the president lost New Hampshire, he lost by about 2,700 votes. It was a razor-thin margin. At the time, then incumbent U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte did not support the Trump-Pence ticket. She also lost that race by about 1,100 or 1,200 votes. Since that time, the state of New Hampshire has actually changed the law. And what it now says is, in order to vote in New Hampshire, you have to be a New Hampshire resident. It was amazing because prior to this, you didn't have to be a resident of the state of New Hampshire to vote in the state of New Hampshire. They had this quirk in the law that said if you felt like you were a New Hampshire resident, you could vote, which means you could come in from Massachusetts and other places and say, I really feel like I'm a New Hampshire resident today.
So you're saying that the vote was not on the up and up?
What I'm saying
is there
is,
were ballots passed illegally? What's
no, not illegally, because the law was clear. You didn't have to be a resident of New Hampshire to vote. So
how many people do you think vote that way?
I think in the 2016 election, there were multiple thousands of individuals. Okay. And the reason was, what happens is campaign workers come to New Hampshire to work there. And maybe they're there for a week, a month, 2 months. They say, look, I feel like I'm a New Hampshire resident now because I've been here for so long. I want to vote in that election. They've now changed that and said, you have to have a driver's license. You have to have a mortgage or a lease or something that identifies you as a resident of the state to vote. The 2020 election will be the first time that law actually takes effect. And I think it's going to dramatically change what every other state says. You want to vote in our elections, you have to be a resident of that state.
What are you basing your numbers on, though? I mean, do you have, like,
same-day voter
stats?
registration numbers. Same-day voter registration numbers from 2016.
Yeah, so, but that doesn't say that the person isn't a New Hampshire resident.
So it wasn't illegal is the point. Yeah. So you could come in from Vermont or New Hampshire or Maine and say, look, I'm staying with Mary Smith at 123 Maple Street in Windham, New Hampshire, and I want to vote, and they say you're legally allowed to do that. Now what they're saying is, if you're just simply staying there for a week, a month, whatever it is, in order to vote in New Hampshire, you have to have a valid New Hampshire driver's license, or you need to have a lease, or you need to prove that you're a resident of the state, which makes common sense. And what that will do is ensure that only the people who are residents of the state have the right to vote there.
Well,
and I think it's a very logical thing.
We'll see if it's going to change things up, Corey. But the main thing is you have really you have ticked off some of the Republican establishment in the state of New Hampshire. Just the former Senator Judd Gregg has accused you of a thug. You've said that at least you didn't have anybody in your family with a military deferment for bedwetting. So is this the type of tone that you expect to take on the Republican establishment in the state? Because they don't want you to run.
Well, look, the Republican establishment in the state of New Hampshire has completely failed. In the last 10 years, they've lost 2 U.S. Senate races, right? The Democrats have both seats. They've lost 2 congressional races. The Democrats have both seats. They've lost what's called the Executive Council in New Hampshire, the state legislature, the state Senate. So if the Republican establishment has done such a great job of choosing these candidates, then where are all the elected Republicans in the state? The only elected Republican in the state right now is Governor Chris Sununu. So if we're going to revert back to the way it's always been done, then we're going to continue to fail. So
What's the new vision for New Hampshire?
It's very simple.
Yeah.
Take the fight directly to them. Believe in what you believe in and fight for that belief. And, you know, it's easy to say that I want someone who can expand the base and I can, you know, bring moderates in, and all that sounds great. But if you don't motivate the individuals who are going to show up and vote on Election Day, then it doesn't matter. And the truth is, in New Hampshire, it's retail politics. It's out shaking hands. It's out knocking on doors. It's out having house parties. I understand that. And that's what motivates people to show up and vote. And so, look, I don't belong to a country club, right? I wouldn't be accepted at a country club. And growing up poor gives me special privileges because I know what it's like to be poor. No one in my family, my daddy, my grandfather, they weren't a governor or a congressman or U.S. senator before me. Nobody handed me anything. I went to the School of Hard Knocks, and I love it, right? I'm a street fighter, and I love being a street fighter.
So, Corey, we also have Anthony Scaramouche, who's coming up right afterward.
He's a fighter.
To you. Yeah, he is.
By the way, he grew up poor just like me.
So what do you think about his turn against President Trump, given that you're publicly supporting him?
Yeah, where do you think that comes from?
Look, I think Mooch has to do what's good for Mooch, right? And he's a businessman. And I think he's very disappointed in the way that he was treated when he was at the White House, the long 11 days, if you will, right?
No one has ever made more out of 11 days.
No, he's done a very good job. Big Brother or whatever, he's done everything, right? He'll be on Dancing with the Stars next with Spicy.
Yeah.
So look, I think Mooch had to make the decision of what's best for Anthony Scaramucci. And everybody makes that decision. He wrote a book that was very complimentary of the president.
Yeah.
And then I think what happened was the Mooch wanted to continue to be part of the conversation with people in the White House, and for whatever reason that didn't continue. And so now he's decided, after he wrote a very favorable book, to go in a different direction. And hey, look, everybody has to make their own decisions of how they run their lives. I've got great respect for Anthony Scaramucci. He's an amazing businessman from what he started with. You know, he's exceptionally well educated. He's a street fighter. And again, when you grow up poor, you have new respect for what it's like to fight for what you believe in. And look, you know, I believe in certain things. I'm willing to fight for those values. I think the Mooch is too, and he's very good on television.
Are you going to release your tax returns if you run?
What tax returns? I don't. Yeah, sure. Okay. Nobody cares about how much money I've made. I've been very clear.
Some people do care about how you've made that money.
Look, let's talk about how I've made the money, right? I wrote a couple New York Times bestsellers, 2 in 1 year. Nobody does that, okay, by the way. Nobody writes 2 New York Times bestsellers in 1 year. I did. Makes you very wealthy. Ask Bernie Sanders, because he talked about that. And I'm very pleased that I had the opportunity to do that and privilege, right? And then what's my other additional income, right? None. I have some private business I do, which everybody else does. But let's ask Jeanne Shaheen how she's gotten so rich while serving in office. She's been a 3-term governor and a 2-term U.S. senator. She went in as a very average, moderate income individual. She's going to walk out of the U.S. Senate if she left in 2020 with multiple millions of dollars in her bank account. That's not what public service is supposed to be about.
What is your allegation about how she did make that money?
I have no idea. Right? But if it is either selling access through her husband or other family members are cashing in on her position, that should really raise red flags with people. And I don't think that public service is supposed to have been designed so that you go in as an average American, you come out very wealthy. We see it all the time in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle. I think the American people are tired of it, and that's why they sent Donald Trump to Washington.
You've certainly done well as with your association with Trump as well.
Well, hey, that's called America, by the way. When I get on the Trump team...
But isn't that the same thing? I mean, essentially the same thing, whether you're in public office or just associated with someone in public office.
Listen, have you ever seen a horse race? I took the longest of long shots on the horse. I put my money on a guy in January of 2015 that every other person, every other prognosticator and pundit said wasn't not only going to run, had no chance to win. And guess what? I put my money and my life and my career in his hands. I gave up my family for 2 years to spend on the campaign trail, walked away from my children. I don't mean that in a positive sense.
But did you do that for public service, or do you do that for financial benefit?
No. Financial benefit. If everybody thought Donald Trump would lose, the financial benefit would have been getting on the Rubio campaign or the Jeb Bush campaign that had $150 million that went right down the toilet, right? I get on the campaign because I believed in what Donald Trump was saying, and I wanted a different direction for my country.
So what do you think his odds are this time around?
My prediction is Donald Trump will win by a larger electoral margin than he did in the 2016 election.
Which state?
Look, I think he can win New Hampshire, which he didn't win. I think Nevada is very competitive, and the state has trended much more left recently, but that's a very competitive state. I think if you look at New Mexico, we can put it in play. It doesn't necessarily mean you can win it, but you can actually be much more competitive there. And I look at the Democratic field, and I ask the question, which state did Hillary Clinton lose that the Democrats think they can win? Is that Wisconsin? Is that Pennsylvania? It's not Ohio. It's not Iowa.
And who do you
Maybe
think is the
Michigan.
toughest competitor from the Democrats?
Look, they're all so far to the left. When I travel the country, and I do it all the time, I'm on my way down to Louisiana today. I don't see any of them playing in Middle America.
But Corey, doesn't that conflict with what you just said about motivating the base, motivating your people to turn out, right? I mean, I agree with you on that strategy, actually. I think that is why President Trump was able to win, and I think it's where Democrats have failed. They haven't gone to motivate their base. They've tried to play to this centrist moderate who doesn't really exist.
Well, look, the problem the Democrats have is for 30 years, they took the African-American community for granted. And for the first time in really probably our lifetimes, we have a Republican who is talking to the African-American community. And look, he got 6% of the vote in 2016. To put that in perspective, it's double what Mitt Romney got and triple what John McCain got. Now, you look at the criminal justice reform package and you look at the economic indicators that say African-American unemployment is the lowest it's ever been in recorded history. And if the president now gets 10% of the African-American vote, the mathematical data shows there's no way the Democrats can win because they're so used to getting 97 and 98% of that vote. And then you had a historical candidate in Hillary Clinton that the African-American community did not turn out for.
Yeah.
So it was a lower turnout, and Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the vote. As you go to 2020, and you look at states like Michigan, where we've got a great U.S. Senate candidate in John James, African-American, military veteran, very impressive guy who's going to help drive the African-American turnout in Michigan. That helps Donald Trump. If the Democrats don't get 95 or 96% of the African-American vote, they can't win.
We'll have to see there. We'll have to leave it there, Corey. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Next on Rising, he was a press secretary for 11 days, but he left a very lasting impression.
Now Anthony Scaramouche seems to have changed his mind on President Trump, as we were just discussing. He's going to elaborate on those reasons next.